Hello, Julia. Julia Ficklin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Fanny Andrews, is that you?
Yes, it is, dear. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind a little company this evening, as they are burying Mrs. Cornelia Pope again. Oh, I find it so dreadfully depressing to watch that night after night.
Oh, honey, I know what you mean. Bless her heart. Oh, forget about her. Here, have a seat. I want to tell you something. You know, the other day, I was remembering how you and your sister Meta snuck away from your father and went off and sewed that beautiful bonny blue flag for our soldiers in gray. Oh, it did my heart good to see that beautiful flag waving in the heart of Washington on the very day that Georgia seceded from the Union.
1861. Well, I remember it like it was yesterday. They hoisted Old Glory down off that flagpole in the town square and raised up our single-star bonny blue flag in its place. Oh, the pride that filled my heart. Alas, the excitement of those early days was not to be sustained. Why, by 1865, we were watching the remains of Lee's tattered army marching through our little town. Many of those soldiers stopped in our groves to rest, and hungry, and all we had to feed them were cornfield peas. Lord, I don't care if I ever see another cornfield pea in my life. But we did what we could with what we had, and no one went away hungry.
That's right. You know, when my husband went off to war, well, you do remember him, don't you?
Of course I do.
Well, you know, he was a surgeon with Lee in Virginia. Well, when he went off to fight in the war, I went and lived with my in-laws, Dr. and Mrs. Ficklin, you know, over in Holly Court. Well, in April of 1865, we heard that Mrs. Jefferson Davis was coming to visit Washington. Oh my goodness, the excitement in that house as we made these plans. In addition, Dr. and Mrs. Ficklin's house was going to be where she ate the supper. Oh, we were a little nervous about what to feed her for supper, so we just went ahead and fed her some ham and fried chicken and, you know, whatever we could get out of the garden at the time. And Fanny, guess what? I was the one with my nervous hands that actually got to serve Mrs. Davis the Madeira. We kind of took it from the last bottle that we had that we were saving for my husband's homecoming. I don't think he minded.
I remember that. Mrs. Davis's stay was filled with anxiety. She swore she was not going to travel one more mile until her husband made it to Washington. You know, he was only about a day's ride behind her. But she had to leave before he arrived, as those Yankees were getting ever so close.
You know, I think, didn't she leave on May the 2nd, and then President Davis came in on May 3rd, the very next day? Well, now, correct me if I'm wrong, dear.
No, you are exactly right, Julia. Why, when poor Mr. Davis came to Washington, he was exhausted. Went straight to bed, he did. Oh, I remember everyone in the town was just nervous with excitement, trying to get a glimpse of our beloved president. Then the next morning, after his final cabinet meeting, standing on the steps of the Baptist church, saying farewell to Reverend Tucker, and then calmly riding out of town. And then the next day, those Yankees showed up in our town. Stayed 5 years, they did.
Now, honey, don't get all worked up about that. Don't you remember what Mrs. Davis said right before she left? I think I wrote it down. She said, and I quote, "I feel warm to have received more attention in Washington than would have been shown to me in the palmest days of our prosperity." Oh, What a warm and kind woman she was.
Oh, yes, she was, dear. Yes, she was. Well, I think they're about done with Mrs. Pope for the evening. I'd best be getting back before it gets too late.
Okay.
Thank you, dear Julia, for lifting my spirits. I do appreciate it so.
Well, you come back anytime.
Good night, dear.
Good night.